Chair Paul Ryan. That comes up at 10:30 on C-SPAN 3. You'll be able to see it live there. We now go live to the floor of the House of Representatives, where they're getting ready for morning hour speeches.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 5th, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Kevin Yoder to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, 1 year ago today, a massive explosion ripped through the 2-mile area of Upper Big Branch Mine in Montcole, West Virginia. The explosion bent railroad tracks like pretzels and killed 29 miners. The disaster laid bare the loopholes that riddle our mine safety laws. These loopholes allow dubious mine operators like Massey Energy to violate mine safety rules repeatedly and with impunity. In fact, the Upper Big Branch Mine was allowed to remain open even though it had been ordered to stop operations 51 times in the previous year because of severe safety hazards. After the disaster, there were proclamations made from both sides of the aisle about taking meaningful action to honor the victims so something like this would never happen again. However, standing here a year later, miners still face many of the same dangers as they did the morning before the tragedy in West Virginia. Unscrupulous mine operators are still gaming the system by clogging it with thousands of appeals as a way to avoid paying strong penalties. Miners are still paralyzed with fear of being fired for speaking out because of weak whistleblower protections. Decisions made in the boardrooms to maximize coal production at the expense of miner safety remain unchallenged. Management practices of illegally giving advance warning of pending inspections are still a mere misdemeanor. Shortly after the Big Branch tragedy, the Education and Labor Committee held the only hearings where Congress heard from families and miners affected by this tragedy. Many were reluctant to testify because they feared retaliation. For others, there was a strong desire to tell the stories to prevent another tragedy in the coal mines in America. Eddie Cook told us about the dangerous practices he heard from the miners in Upper Big Branch Mine after the explosion. He lost his 21-year-old nephew, Adam Morgan. Adam's father, Steve Morgan, said that when he spoke to his son about the unsafe conditions, management told him that he might just have to find another job. They did nothing about the unsafe conditions. Gary Quarles lost his only son at Upper Big Branch. Gary asked us to make a commitment to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Alice Peters testified how her son-in-law, Dean Jones, was afraid to work in the mine because of the ventilation problems. But Dean needed the job in order to keep health insurance coverage for his special needs son. Clay Mullins lost his brother Rex in Upper Big Branch. Clay testified how the management would give advance warnings of an impending mine safety inspection so that they could quickly cover up any violations before the federal inspectors got to that part of the mine. And Stanley Goose Stewart was working in Upper Big Branch Mine the day it exploded. He testified twice before the committee about the persistent fear and intimidation faced by workers from Massey management. Every mine law has been written with the blood of miners, and savvy political interests know that as the attention of the tragedy fades, so does the willingness of the Congress to act decisively. Families and miners also expressed their concern about this skepticism. Looking back now, a year later, their skepticism was entirely justified. Congress has utterly failed to respond to the real problems that miners themselves have identified as safety hazards in their workplace. A toxic political environment has failed these families, and the pay-to-play nature of our politics failed these families. While congressional action was stymied, the Mine Safety Health Administration has been working hard and making adjustments in limited ways in which it can to help prevent rogue mine operators from recklessly putting lives at risk. But even with these measures, we're hearing the familiar cries from Big Coal to maintain the status quo while they continue to game the legal system designed to protect the miners who go to work in those mines every day. They cry about their so-called due process. But what about the due process for the 29 miners who died in the Big Branch mine explosion and their families, and the miners who went to work today in the coal mines of America and their families? Is Congress just going to sit here and simply wait for the next explosion, the next tragedy, the next loss of life? Or are we going to let the special interests continue to paralyze this institution? These should not be hard questions for the Congress of the United States. Our ability to respond goes to the heart of who we are as a nation. There are things that Congress can and must do right now, and that only Congress can do, to better ensure that every coal miner who goes to work is able to return safely to their families at the end of their shift. Congress has an obligation to make sure that that is the case. It's long overdue to honor our promises to the families of the 29 miners who perished a year ago for doing the job that our nation relies on to provide its energy. And it's also long overdue to give the rest of our nation's miners modern health and safety protections. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, boxing legend Muhammad Ali once said, and I quote, "Championships aren't made in the gyms. Champions are made from something they have deep inside them, a desire, a dream, a vision." I'd like to recognize 2 high school basketball teams from my district who prove that they are indeed champions. They had the desire to make every practice count and play every game as if it were their last. They shared a dream that was strong enough to overcome the many distractions all high school kids face. And their coaches gave them the vision that all their hard work and sacrifice would pay off in the end. The schools, the LaSalle Lancers, and the Taft Senators. First, congratulations to the LaSalle Lancers on winning the 2011 Ohio Division I Basketball State Championship. LaSalle is a boys' Catholic high school in my district that's particularly special to me since it's my alma mater. Regardless of my personal attachments to the school, I like to recognize them on a job well done and a season well played. They represented themselves and our community with an outstanding display of athleticism, sportsmanship, and class throughout the season, but especially in the playoffs. The players and coaches stuck together in the face of adversity, especially when their head coach, Dan Fleming, suffered a heart attack that placed sports and the tournament in perspective. The LaSalle family rallied around their coach, and the Lancers, led by the seniors and the assistant coaches, went on to win their first basketball state championship in 15 years and the second in school's history. I'd also like to congratulate Coach Tom Grippa and the LaSalle Lancer football team for their tremendous season. You made us proud. Congratulations, Lancers. I also rise today to congratulate the Taft High School Senators who won the Division III Basketball State Championship. Now, I acknowledge that it's rare that a member of this esteemed body, the House of Representatives, ever says anything positive about senators, but I'd like to make an exception today. Led by their head coach, Mark Mitchell, the Senators defeated Cleveland Central Catholic High School to win the first state championship in their school's history. The Senators went into the tournament ranked #1 by the Associated Press. They not only made school history by winning their first state championship, but they also set a Division III boys basketball record for the most points scored in a championship game. Finishing the season at 26-1 is quite a feat. It's an honor to have them represent our district, and I congratulate them on their success. I'd be remiss if I didn't also commend former Cincinnati Bengals star Mike Martin for the tremendous effort that he's made in turning around the Taft High School's football program, mentoring his players to the success in life that they will have as well as on the football field. Let me conclude by once again congratulating the players, the coaches, the students, the faculty, and the fans of Cincinnati's LaSalle Lancers and Taft Senators for the inspirational seasons you've just completed. You've made all of us very proud. Your accomplishments will be long remembered. Go Lancers and go Senators. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Ray Hall, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 1 year since the fatal explosion at Upper Big Branch Mine. 365 days since we lost 29 courageous coal miners, fathers and sons, brothers and friends. We vowed then that some good would come from this terrible tragedy, and we can say that criminal investigations are almost complete. Enforcement has toughened. The Congress has increased funding to target pattern violators, and yet coal miners are still dying in our coal fields. It's easy to doubt. It's easy to question whether things can be made better. I find inspiration in the biblical verse from Romans, glory in tribulations also, knowing that tribulations worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. Never lose hope that we can improve the health and safety of miners in the coal fields. Never lose hope that we can pass tougher mine safety laws and that we can enforce those laws and save lives. There are plenty of good coal companies in America, companies that put time and effort and money into making their workplaces safe in which they operate. They are forward-thinking coal companies with strong safety records that have designed programs aimed at protecting the lives and preserving the health of their miners. They want to see those bad actors, those companies that have tarnished the reputation of an important industry, reined in. They do not accept a world in which they must compete against companies that would sacrifice health and lives of their own employees for competitive advantage and blatant profit. There are plenty of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who recognize that legislation is necessary. Congressman Miller, Congressman Lynn Woolsey, and I, and along with many others, will continue fighting for reforms to give the agencies the tools they need to target the bad actors. We want to ensure that sound companies have good records, can continue to perform and produce, but we just as surely want to ensure that the worst of the worst operators can be reined in and that lives can be saved. We can strike a balance, and we will. Changes and improvements may come slowly, but they will come. As long as coal miners and these brave, courageous families continue to demand that the loss of their loved ones not be in vain, they will come. The April 5th disaster of 1 year ago was a tragedy that never, ever should have occurred. It must provide accountability, and we have a duty to institute changes that will help prevent a repeat of that awful day. Those 29 coal miners should not have perished. And for them and all those miners on the job today, we must keep speaking out. Tonight, I will be at a 1-year anniversary with the families of all of these perished coal miners. I will look in the eyes of their loved ones once again as I did that painful week following the tragedy, 24 hours, 7 days a week. We will join and we will commemorate these good men and people who have come together to try to rescue them. For them we say thank you, and to provide comfort, and to provide a final closure to these families, which we have yet to do. These families want accountability. They want the truth, and they want to ensure that no other families ever have to suffer the way they have. Chairman Miller, Lynn Woolsey, and I remain committed to their cause, and I urge my colleagues to join us in this life-saving, important endeavor. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Last Tuesday, Congresswoman Sue Myrick and I went to visit the wounded at Walter Reed. These trips are always a vivid reminder of the true cost of war. Seeing the men and women who have lost limbs for this country make me wonder how many more are going to be in that hospital, both at Walter Reed and Bethesda, with severe wounds. After hearing Secretary Gates, I have great respect for Secretary Gates, but he has made it clear that we will be in Afghanistan until 2014. He said it would be 2014 or 2015 before we can start substantially bringing down the number of troops in that country. Here we are in Washington battling right now about the 2011 budget. What should we do or not do, and cut this and cut that? Yet we seem to find $8 billion a month for a corrupt leader in Afghanistan named Karzai. He's corrupt and his government is corrupt. And yet we're saying to the American people, if you're a senior, we can't be sure that you can get a sandwich at the Senior Citizen Center in your county. We're saying to the children that cannot afford milk at home, well, there will be no programs for you. But yet we can find $8 billion a month for a corrupt leader in a country, in a war that we cannot win. Our troops have already won. But history says you will not change Afghanistan, and I won't go through the history because of time. But, Mr. Speaker, Karzai, one day he likes American troops being over there, and the next day he doesn't like the American troops being there. In fact, in December of 2010 in the Washington Post, and I quote him, I'll paraphrase this, Karzai said to General Petraeus, he said, I have three main enemies, the Taliban, the Americans, and the international community. If I had to choose a friend today, now again, this is the president of Afghanistan, I would choose the Taliban. They're the ones killing Americans and blowing their legs off and their arms off. And how much longer does this have to go on? I say to my colleagues in both parties, join Representative Kucinich and Ron Paul and myself and many others, let's bring our troops home. I have a photograph here, Mr. Speaker, that was in the Raleigh, North Carolina paper about a year ago. This is a young Army sergeant. His legs are gone. They've been blown off. His right arm has been blown off, and he has a left arm. He's what they call a triple amputee. And his lovely wife is there pushing the wheelchair. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the American people to say to those of us in Congress, do not keep our troops there until 2014, 2015, 2016 for a corrupt leader. It's time to bring our troops home. I have the fortune of representing Camp Lejeune Marine Base in my district. I talked to the Marines who are brave as brave can be, that have been there 3, 4, and 5 times. I've talked to the families as they're breaking up, the families when their loved one has committed suicide upon returning from Afghanistan. It's time to bring them home. How many more would be like this sergeant, without legs, without arms? Mr. Speaker, last week on Tuesday, Sue Myrick and I saw 2 young men, one from Florida and one from Nevada, that have no body parts below their waist. The body parts are gone. Everything is gone. Wake up, Congress, and let's bring our troops home from Afghanistan. My close is this, Mr. Speaker. I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. Mr. Speaker, I ask God to bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in God's eyes. I'll ask God to give wisdom, strength, and courage to President Obama that he will do what is right in the eyes of God. And I'll ask 3 times, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
My colleagues, I rise to pay tribute to one of the great Americans that we've ever had in this body, Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro. Most of the people remember her as an exciting vice presidential candidate, but those of us in the New York delegation remember her as just a great personality, a great legislator, and a great American. We in the New York delegation have been fighting for time in which we could express ourselves, but the legislative calendar has not been very kind to us. So this morning we have 2 of her dear friends, in Congresswoman McCarthy and Congresswoman Maloney, and I suspect that every time a New York member gets an opportunity, we will grab that time so that no one will ever say that she did not leave footprints here, that all of us were just so proud. She succeeded Jim Delaney, who was known to be a very conservative Democrat from Long Island, and we all awaited to see just who was going to succeed Jim. And to see this beautiful, intellectual, former teacher, former assistant district attorney to come here We all waited with breath held back to see just what type of woman she would be. And even though she held closely those conservative views, it has never been presented to this body in a more eloquent, more charming way as we found ourselves with this new, exciting candidate who later became a member and became a part of the leadership of the New York delegation. And once Tip O'Neill saw her, she became a part of the Congressional Democratic delegation and just went on that wherever she went, she excelled with her smile, with her brains, and contributed so much in raising the standards of members of Congress and those who would run for national office. I worked pretty closely with Senator Fritz Mondale when he ran for President of the United States. And while he was looking for a vice presidential candidate, I was so pleased but surprised that Tip O'Neill said that he thought that within our delegation the answer to Fritz Mondale's problem would be the nomination of Geraldine Ferraro. I was surprised but so excited that I could serve on the Mondale team and to be able to say not only do we have a New Yorker, but we have an exciting candidate that could provide that shot in the arm that the Mondale campaign was so badly needed. And I felt so much like an American when we found out that her background was one of near poverty. Her dad had come here from Italy, that she just made the Italian-American community just so proud. She made women from all over the country proud. She made New Yorkers proud. And certainly, while she did not succeed in becoming a vice president, as Mondale did not get the numbers that he needed, she became a national figure, a compassionate figure, serving in the United Nations, serving on television in terms of expressing the views of the Democratic Party, raising funds for candidates, and then when she was stricken with this terrible disease that she died from, you would only hear her talking about her husband, John, her beautiful children, and how she can help to make it a better, more effective Democratic Party, as well as what contributions can she make to this great country. And so we in the New York delegation feel extremely proud that she was a part of us. She had her own personal family that she loved, her own church, her own community. She had the respect and support of all Americans and the deep-seated feeling that Italian Americans have. She was so well respected in Democratic circles and congressional circles, but most of all, we remember what a gentle lady she was. We have an expression in this House of Representatives, the gentleman from Wisconsin, the gentlewoman from New York. But anyone who known Jerry, as we so affectionately called her, would know that she was indeed a strong leader, but a gentle leader from Long Island and from New York. I thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Buchanan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, in my home state of Florida, 7 people die a day, each day, on prescription drug abuse. 7. We had 3 teenagers a couple of weeks ago die in 1 week. A gentleman, a friend of mine, buried his daughter on a Saturday. I talked to him on Monday, and he pleaded with me to do something about killing these pill mills all across our state. Florida prescribes 10 times more oxycodone pills than all other states combined. To put it simply, we have more pain clinics than McDonald's restaurants. It's time to put these pill mills out of business. We have 1,300 pill mills in Florida. We need to shut them down now. 4,000 deaths in Florida in 2008. I've introduced legislation to crack down on pill mills. My bill would stiffen penalties and fines and use the seize assets to fund prescription drug databases. 42 states have databases. Florida does not. We need a database today. The time to act is now. I urge my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to join me in this fight to put these pill mills out of business and stop these needless deaths. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with the New York delegation to honor the memory and many contributions of one of our favorite daughters, Geraldine Ferraro. Last Thursday, New Yorkers poured out in great numbers to honor her at her funeral. Her 3 children, Donna, Laura, and John Jr., spoke eloquently and movingly in support and love of their late mother. And at the funeral, and speaking in a eulogy beautifully for her, Vice President Mondale, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, Congresswoman Jane Harman, Senator Murkowski, and former President Clinton. It would have thrilled her to see 4 women precede a president in eulogizing and speaking about her, 2 of whom were Secretaries of State, because it was her life that helped inspire and move women forward in our national life, not only in politics but in every area, business, finance, all areas of American life. Geraldine Ferraro inspired with her life and her historic run for Vice President of the United States. With her passing, America lost a leader who was as wise as she was warm, a trailblazer who broke down barriers for women everywhere, not just the United States, but across the world. Geraldine Ferraro was a champion and a heroine. For me personally, she was a dear, dear friend and a mentor. What seemed to non-New Yorkers as a feisty and fast-talking woman seemed to us as just another mom from Queens. She inspired us with her personal story, the daughter of Italian immigrants, raised by her seamstress mother after her father died at 8. She became a public school teacher, a lawyer, one of just 2 women in her law class, and a member and leader of Congress, elected in 1978. She also, after her historic run, became a commentator on television, a delegate to the United Nations. She headed the World Conference in Beijing in 1995, and I was proud to be part of her delegation, the World Conference on Women. Last August, on her 75th birthday, we renamed the post office in Long Island City in her honor. It used to be in her district, it is now in mine, and I was honored to be able to author the legislation and work with my New York colleagues and others to pass it. And she was so thrilled at that naming, to see so many of her friends, not only from New York and her district, but across the country, come in one place to honor her. Later that day, which happened to also be Women's Equality Day, she rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange in honor of the Progress for Women. I know that a post office is only the start of the memorials to this wonderful, charming, talented trailblazer who continued blazing trails her entire life. I met with her shortly before she died, and she had a list of constituents she wanted helped and causes she wanted completed. We do stand on her shoulders and women like her who came before us. I will never forget, as a eager young delegate to the 1984 Democratic National Convention, I can tell you firsthand that Geraldine Ferraro thrilled us when she took the stage as the first woman ever nominated by a major political party to be its candidate for Vice President of the United States. It was absolutely electrifying. She changed my life, and she changed the lives of women everywhere. She changed the aspirations of women and how they view themselves. I will never forget being on the floor. Many of the men gave their delegate card to the women delegates who were part-time delegates, so the floor was filled with women. People were handing out cigars saying, "It's a woman." And when she went to the floor, there was literally applause for over 10 minutes. I shall miss her dearly and shall honor her passing by redoubling my efforts to complete her unfinished work, to pass the ERA. It is time to enshrine in our Constitution the high principle of gender equality that Geraldine Ferraro so courageously stood for in her life. Geraldine, we will miss you, we honor you, we thank you for your many, many contributions to American life. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. McCarthy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also am part of the New York delegation, and I want to talk about Geraldine Ferraro and my good colleague, Carol Maloney, who basically laid out her life on all the good things that she did. I guess I want to talk about, you know, what she meant to so many of us that weren't even in politics back then. I think the first time that I ever saw Geraldine or heard of Geraldine when she was announcing that she's going to be running for vice president. So all these things that from last week when we were notified that Geraldine had passed away, many of us wanted to go back to New York for the funeral. Unfortunately, our business here kept us here, so we couldn't go back. We're kind of used to that. You know, a lot of times it's said you can spend a lifetime here in Congress, but 2 minutes after you die, they will say, "Who is that?" But that's not Geraldine. Geraldine was someone that was a force. You know, again, I say in 1984, like most Americans, I took notice of Geraldine Ferraro when she did accept the Democratic nomination for vice president at the National Convention in San Francisco. She stuck to me as a unique figure on TV, a woman in a male-dominated profession. She had a smile, she had confidence. You know, when she got onto that stage, you just knew this radiance that came out of her. And for myself, I was not in politics, didn't follow politics too well, but she certainly gave a strong impression to me. Her message was also full of hope. And I happen to believe that, you know, especially when we try to say to people, if we can do this, we can do anything. I'm one of those people that believe that. I'm here in Congress. Everybody said I couldn't do that. Somehow I got here. Somehow I've stayed here. Somehow I keep fighting for my constituents so much back at home. But she inspired women to get involved. She inspired them to get involved in politics, whether at the staff level or as a candidate. And while I understood the importance of the event, I had no idea that I would be standing here praising this woman that I first saw on TV. As I said, I had no political ambitions. I was a nurse, just several miles away from the city where Geraldine was. Like most Americans, I did vote and I followed the news, but never thought I would get involved in politics. 1996, fast forward 12 years, and it's mid-1996, and I'm still a nurse in Nassau County, and still not thinking about politics whatsoever. Something happened to my life as it does to so many other lives. An event happens, and all of a sudden, you change and become an activist. Gun violence was, unfortunately, the issue that hit my family and many families on the Long Island Railroad. My husband was killed. My son was seriously wounded. But you know what? I decided that I was going to do something about it. And Geraldine Ferraro, the person that I saw on TV, called me. Said, "Carolyn, you know, you should really think about running for Congress." And there were other people calling me too, and I'm going, I'm a nurse. What do I know about politics? But you know what? if I was going to try and do something, then I had to run. Everybody told me I was going to lose. Maybe I would have, but I didn't. I won. But Geraldine was always there to give advice. You know, just because you're a woman doesn't mean you can't be tough. Just because you're a woman, you can be tough and you can be gentle. And you have to use that to get legislation done. Well, here I am in Congress, and I'm proud to be following the footsteps of Geraldine Ferraro. I wouldn't use the words, the kind words that people use for her on myself like a pioneer or a trailblazer. I actually followed Geraldine and her advice to come to Washington and try to make a difference. Like so many women in New York politics today, Geraldine helped me as I went through from private citizen to candidate to public official. She opened so many doors for me, introducing to me people that I needed to meet. She was well known for this, for spending as much energy helping lift up others and having another woman follow. We'll all remember you, Geraldine. I will always remember you. God bless you. We do remember you. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to
Without objection.
address the House for 5 minutes, revise and extend. Mr. Speaker, it was exactly 1 year ago today that an explosion ripped through Upper Big Branch Mine in Montcole, West Virginia, killing 29 workers. It was the deadliest mine accident in 40 years. But perhaps accident is the wrong word to characterize what happened in Montcole, West Virginia last April 5th. This wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't a tsunami or some other act of nature. Although the Mine Safety and Health Agency, MSHA, has yet to complete their investigation, it is absolutely clear from the preliminary reports that this tragedy was avoidable, but for negligence and carelessness on the part of Massey Energy. When Chairman Miller and I traveled to West Virginia with Congressman Rahal, miners told us that Massey routinely cut corners on safety. And yet the miners were afraid, they told us this too, to come forward for fear of losing their jobs. That's why we need stronger federal whistleblower protections, Mr. Speaker. MSHA inspectors can't be everywhere all the time, so we need to rely on the people who know best. We need to rely on the people, the workers, those that can report safety violations because they're living with them. And we must ensure that these workers have job protection when they come forward. The questions we need to be asking ourselves are, what can we be doing to make sure this does not happen again to them? What can we do to ensure that our nation's coal miners, some of the hardest working and courageous people you'll ever meet, aren't descending into a potential death trap every time they clock in? But the silence from the United States Congress has been positively deafening. It's incomprehensible to me that we still haven't passed the Robert C. Byrd Miner Safety and Health Act. How many miners have to die before we take action? Worker safety, not just in mines, but in workplaces above ground and across the nation, is under siege thanks to irresponsible cuts in the Republican continuing resolution. Fully half of OSHA staff would be furloughed if H.R. 1 becomes law. A weak economy like this one that we're living in right now also further undermines worker safety because as workers who want to report violations know, there are dozens who would take their jobs in spite of unsafe conditions just to have work. Mr. Speaker, last Congress I was chair, and now this Congress I'm the ranking minority member of the Workforce Protection Subcommittee. And in that role, I am absolutely committed, along with Congressman George Miller and Nikki Rahal, to bringing OSHA and MSHA into the 21st century, strengthening regulations to protect people from injury, sickness, and possible death on the job. Needless to say, the Upper Big Branch explosion has devastated a tight-knit community with so many families still coping with grief. Gary Quarles, who testified before the Education and Labor Committee last year, said, "The life's been sucked right out of me because he lost his only child in the explosion." Another man says of the death of his twin brother, "It's like part of me is gone." One woman lost her fiancé, whom she met when they worked side by side in the mine. And I cannot imagine the ordeal of Timothy Blake, who survived the blast and tried in vain to save 8 co-workers. But on this one-year anniversary, Mr. Speaker, let's do more than look back. Let's do more than remember and be sad. Let's use this tragedy as a call to action. In honor of the 29 fallen members, let's give their co-workers the safety and protection they deserve. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, for 5 minutes.
A lot of talk around here about millions, billions, and trillions, but let's just try and put a face on some of the cuts the Republicans put in H.R. 1. I think one of the meanest of their cuts and the stupidest of their cuts is to eliminate a program called Youthbuild. Now, I'm sure most of them don't know what it is. They've never met with the kids who come back here every year. This is a program that started in 1992 under George H.W. Bush. It's a program that takes kids who have generally dropped out of high school, had problems with drugs, alcohol, other things, but at some point decide they want to get straight and they want to do something better with their lives. So this program takes kids between 18 and 16 and 24, helps them get their GED, gets them some counseling, gets them involved in peer groups. They learn leadership skills, teaches them how to build houses, and the houses they build are for low-income Americans. And in the long term, we've found incredible results with this program. Last year, and these are almost 100% high school dropouts with problems, 78% of the kids completed the program. That's pretty extraordinary. And now, after when they leave the program, the longevity of the effect of this program, 7 years after completing the program, 75% of the Youthbuild kids who had problems with drugs, alcohol, homelessness, dropped out of high school, everything else, are either in college or employed in jobs earning more than $10 an hour. Now, that's a pretty darn good investment. Now, what does this cost, and why would the Republicans zero it out? Well, it cost $102 million last year for 20,000 students. Now, we could, I guess, instead leave them in the street without their high school degree, hopeless. Maybe they'll get back on drugs. Maybe they'll get in trouble. Maybe we'll put them in jail, and then we'll pay $30,000 a year to support them in prison. $20,000 for 1 year to get these kids straight and have them become productive members of our society. Zeroed out by the Republicans. Now, it is a lot of money. That's almost 1 hour of spending for the Pentagon across the river. Almost 1 hour. And there's no waste at the Pentagon, though. We're not allowed to look at the Pentagon for waste. It's almost 2 days, that's a lot, of agriculture subsidies, paying people not to grow things. So 2 days of paying people not to grow things, or a year's funding for a program that takes kids who've been in trouble but want to do better, want to learn some skills, want to be productive members of society, and helping them get a leg up. But no, in the Republican world, that's wasteful spending. They zeroed out this program. I met with 8 of these kids last week. I meet with them every year when they come back. I urge my Republican colleagues, for once I asked if they'd seen the Republican member of my delegation. They said no, they met with a staff person, maybe an intern. Republicans can't seem to be bothered. But they should listen to these kids. There's a lot of wisdom there. And I think future leaders there. They've gotten their lives straight, and they've gone through some hard times. And we gave them a little help. Yeah, 1 year. They get $500 a month while they're in the program, while they're building houses for low-income people, learning skills. And as taxpayers in the future, they'll pay that back pretty darn quickly. Now, I wonder why they eliminated this program. First of all, I'm sure they don't know what it is. They've never met with the kids. They don't care. These aren't people who go to the country club, after all. But secondly, probably because it's housed in the Department of Labor, and we hate anything on the Republican side of the aisle that has the word labor in it. God forbid that America should do things for working people in this country, or working people should be allowed the right to organize and have a better life. Well, this is a program that should be continued. It should, in fact, be enhanced. They had 19,000 kids who couldn't get in the program last year on the waiting list, 19,000. We should double the size of this program, maybe triple it. That would be a huge amount of money. That would be 3 hours of spending at the Pentagon, or almost a week of subsidies paying corporations not to grow things on surplus lands. Boy, I guess we can't afford that, can we? But we can't cut the subsidies, and we can't look for waste at the Pentagon, but we can stick it to these kids. Good work, Republicans.
Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Velasquez, for 5 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize a great American and one of the great political trailblazers in American history, Geraldine Ferraro. Many of us speaking today, myself included, would likely not have achieved our successes without her paving the way ahead of us. Of course, her contributions did not benefit just those of us in the political sphere. Her life was an important symbol to girls and women who aspire to succeed in any field, particularly those who have struggled to break into professions traditionally dominated by men. The 1984 presidential campaign is remembered by many as a landslide for President Ronald Reagan. He was, in fact, a very popular president. But many of us who aspired to enter politics were electrified to see the first female on the presidential ticket. Of course, Jerry was more than just the first woman on a presidential ticket. Those of us from the New York delegation remember her service to Queens and really to all 5 boroughs. Before coming to the House, her life had already been dedicated to the service of others in the district attorney's office and as an educator for our city's youth. Perhaps most of all, she will be fondly remembered for her wit, kindness, and grace. Yet, despite her gentleness, she was also not one to shirk from speaking her mind. Mr. Speaker, women everywhere have lost an inspiration. New York has lost a public servant, and all of us has lost a great American. Her legacy will be remembered, and I am proud to be on the House floor remembering her many contributions. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
And when members return, they'll consider the rules for debate on a bill disapproving